Okay, alrighty. Okay, so I'm doing a hopefully very quick video about the pulse and the little bloop theory and associated levels of thinking. I've gotten some heat from a couple of, one guy wanted to even debate me, and it's like, I can't do debates. First off, he might be a half-wit, I don't know. Wouldn't want to abuse the mentally ill. But also those are kind of open-ended. Who would judge it? You know, my point in delivering the information is for, if you want to accept it, fine. If not, fine, right? So it's like, okay, big bangers, all them big bangers out there. Where is any single demonstrable galactic evidence of entropy? There just is none. The Big Bang Theory, for all those people that don't understand, is the idea that everything was encapsulated in a little tiny whatever, and it suddenly exploded. It got all pissed off and suddenly exploded, and all of the universe came into existence, and it's been expanding ever since. And at some point, the idea is that it's going to contract. There's other ramifications for all of this. This is basically an adaptation of a Hindu belief about this that is anthropomorphized in the idea of Brahma waking up from a dream and we're all his dream, and then he goes back to sleep and the next universe is created, that kind of thing. Big Bang Theory has as a necessary component of it the idea that at some point in the length of time of expansion of the universe, you would get galaxies whose energy would run out. It would go 100% into entropy, and that particular galaxy, first a solar system and then the rest of the galaxy, would go into an entropic state. And these would be visible to us. We would be able to see entropic galaxies throughout the universe, and we can find none. Not, you know, and there should be plentiful given the length of time that people say universe has existed. And there's no sign of entropy in our own microclimate of Earth or our solar system or our galaxy. We can't find any example of entropy at all. So that understanding is not valid in my opinion. And the other understanding of the pulse is a very ancient one. And it probably does predate Sanskrit, but the first indication I've ever heard of it was of a translation of one of these Sanskrit descriptions of universe. So anyway, a lot of people have picked up on the pulse. It's not my idea. The pulse has to occur at universe oscillates between existence and non-existence, between creation and destruction, boom, 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 constantly. It does this 44 trillion times a second. 22 trillion times a second, universe exists. 22 trillion times of a second, void exists and there is nothing. This alternation is the power. That oscillation provides the power of universe, and it provides the power of all energy in the materium, which is where universe exists. That's where matter exists, where our bodies are, where stuff is solid, these kind of things, right? And so the energy that we derive and have in this materium is 100% a creation of the pulse itself and its absence. The absence is necessary. The pulse provides, both the pulse, when we exist within the pulse, and we also exist curiously, very curiously, in the void. And this is what meditators call it, right? Zen meditators, you're seeking the void. And that's because we exist in the pulse mostly. And so we're going to reference this pulse as a flash. And so there will be a flash of a point where the pulse exists. And so this is 1/22 trillionth, or this span right here is 1/44th trillionth part of a second. Okay, so this happens 22 trillion times, but there's an equal value of non-existence. So this is 1/44 trillionth of a second. Now, if we graphically imagine existence to be pulse, void, pulse, void, pulse, void, pulse, void, and just keep doing it this way, then each and every one of these periods of time is universe in toto being recreated instantly. Well, so instantly, that so fast that our minds will never be able to create any machine, any augmentation to our sensory apparatus that will be able to visualize creation. It must be left up to the imagination. This is one of the rules of universe that we derive from the materium, that the materium has to look real enough. And so in a sense, I'm saying, yes, we live in a simulation, but no, it's not computer controlled. No, it's not some mad scientist that's sitting around there in a corporeal form working little buttons to make us all do shit. No, it's not that kind of a simulation. It's a simulation in understanding that is so vast that when you have these insights, we call them enlightenment. You sit there in an absolute staggering state, sweating for like 15 hours. Basically come out of it and crawl over to get water, and then collapse on a bed for 3 days trying to grok what the hell you've just understood. So this is the pulse. In between is the void. The void is valid. That's that place that meditators try and get to. The void is reachable, in my opinion, as a meditator. The void is the actual, or the creation as it's coming out of the void in that 1/44 trillionth of a second. That's what causes the universal hiss, the that meditators that are clued in on their ears can hear. Each and every one of these represents the whole universe being recreated. Basically, as I was saying yesterday, and I've said previously in the little bloop theory, each and every time there is a pulse, in the beginning, the pulse started off and it just went a little ways, turned around and came over and crossed itself. It did this repeatedly very fast until it crossed itself in such density that it condensed that energy into the first matter, which was a hydrogen ion. And space, time, universe, materium, and that hydrogen ion that was the first seed block, so to speak. That was the Genesis block that was first mined. And universe came into existence at that point, around that single hydrogen ion. In the space and the time around that single hydrogen ion, that time being duration, persistence. And the pulse, moving really damn fast, recreated the next hydrogen ion in just, a space so small we cannot conceive of it. And so there were 2 hydrogen ions, and then 3, and so on and so on. These are little bloops of matter, bloop, 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 bloop. And because each and every time that the pulse comes in, it instantly recreates all the stuff that it has done before and then does something else and creates new. And so it grows continuously. That accounts for the continually growing nature of universe. The little bloop theory accounts for the fact that there's no entropy to be found anywhere, because the universe does not begin and end in an entropic explosion and then implosion. That's not how it functions. And so we have the hydrogen ions continually being recreated even now as we speak, as you are watching this, no matter what time in the future, no matter how many years after I'm dead, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's still going on. We're still expanding. It's still going and going and going. Little bloops. Everything is built from the basic hydrogen ion complexity. Now, here's where we get into the understanding of why there's no time travel. It's all about complexity. As the pulse does something new each and every time in all of these bursts, recreating the universe, the complexity level rises. So the complexity level is on this upward exponential slope almost instantly with the creation of the first hydrogen ion. And it's being maintained that way ever after. And it is truly asymptote. Okay, it goes like this, and it's going to come very close to perpendicular on a graph, but it'll never ever quite touch it, and it'll keep going and going and going. And that's the complexity rate. Okay, so as the complexity grows, in the first burst there was just the single hydrogen ion, and then the second hydrogen ion along with the first, and then 30 or 40 million of them, and then 55 billion of them, and then a number so big I couldn't say it, and then onward, right? And then we start getting all the other stuff because pulse, maybe it gets bored, I don't know. And it just makes more complexity. It has to do with crossing over itself and the matter, the condensate becoming more and more complex as the number of crossings increases. And that condensate of matter becomes more complicated and complex because universe must necessarily desire this. It must be a function of existence of life, that sort of thing, that complexity must increase on an asymptote fashion, never reaching the perpendicular, but coming so close we could not distinguish. Ever rising, ever faster, ever more complex. And here's why we can't have time travel. Now let's just say, for instance, I'm going to get rid of this here for a second. Let's just say that right here is, okay, so let's just say this is like 1941. And this one over here represents 1955. And here is 1985. And here's 2015. Okay, so we've got sort of the Back to the Future numbers here, right? And the idea is this, that you got your character here in 1955, and this guy has a particular level of complexity, okay? And he has 1955 complexity. And think about this for a minute. Each and every time the pulse recreates, it has to recreate existence as it existed in the pulse before, and then advance it. And this is how we have motion in universe. If you didn't have that motion, if you didn't have the pulse, if you didn't have the voids, you could not have motion as we understand it. Nor could you have energy, because that pulse is just like our pulse pumping our blood. It allows, that gap allows for the movement, and also creates the energy that propels the next movement. Anyway, so we got our 1955 character here. He has 1955 levels of complexity. Now, if we think about this from the viewpoint of the pulse, an interesting thing occurs. In this 1955, he's been eating hamburgers, drinking milk, Pepsi made with sugar, has never encountered high fructose corn syrup, or any of the modern chemicals and so on that we currently have in our society, in our environment, and floating throughout our bodies. And so this guy is like 1955 level pure, right? And so in 1985, the same guy has progressed over the course of time, and the growth of complexity. He too has grown in complexity and age. Maybe he's got a little belly, and he's no longer 1955 pure because he's got new chemicals in his body. High fructose corn syrup. He's gotten all of the pollutants that have come in this intervening 30 years. He's got metals in him that didn't exist in 1955, etc. Right? His body is more polluted, so he's like polluted prime. Now, there are issues relative in a mechanistic sense, a conceptual sense, to time travel, because the idea is, for most people, that time travel consists of us getting our bodies zapped or something and physically going back in time or going forward. There's issues both ways. But so this guy would, the idea is that he would go back in time and pop back out here in 1955. But now how is the pulse to deal with this? Okay. Some of the chemicals in 1985 character don't exist in 1955. The pulse has never ever created them in 1955 because the complexity is way smaller. It's way lower than what's going to exist in the next 30 years. That complexity being compounded by humans who are agents of change. As agents of change, we promulgate complexity as though we're, we just sweat. It comes out in our sweat. We can't help it. We're just making stuff so much more complex. And so the giant gap between in just those 30 years, right? To say nothing of like 1941. So if you were trying to go back here, what does the pulse do? Does it, in its all-knowing wisdom, so to speak, recreate you as this person from 1985? With all those new chemicals? Does it recreate you in 1955 without those new chemicals, on the theory that, well, it knows how to make flesh, but it doesn't know how to make, flesh that's been hampered by polyethylene glycol in a vaccine or something, right? And so it maybe leaves that out. So it could be like it would filter out all the bad stuff. Well, I don't think that would really be the way that the pulse is going to work on this. And there's other reasons to know that time travel is not energetically possible, right? But the level of complexity here is the real key teller point. The complexity from 1985 to 1955 is going to be vast, but the complexity from 2015 back to 85 or back to 55 is going to be that much vaster, times the number of people that have been out making things more complex, adding new chemicals, pumping the aerosols in the sky. They just did an assay on humans, and we've got like 55 new chemicals that they didn't find in us in 1985. Well, where'd we get those? Well, now the pulse is creating all of those in all of us every time it recreates itself, 22 trillion times a second. That complexity is an aspect of the actual, that would actually be a temporal paradox. How would the pulse deal with the extra complexity here that does not exist here? And there's only so many avenues that could be used in a rational thinking about it for that complexity to be dealt with. Then there's the reverse of that. Say that you went forward in time, and that you could actually sort of conceive of this at one level, but let's just say that we went forward in time and that we moved ourselves over here to 2020 or 2000. Yeah, let's make it 2020. Okay, so, and you pop down here, and this is you in 2020. And you're trucking around and that kind of thing. Your level of complexity here is easily recreated here because it is less than this area, right? Oh, hey, sure. So this is what? Some form of a temporal paradox for time travel, because maybe you could just go forward in time because your complexity would always be less here than there. You would have to accept that it was always a one-way journey, right? Just as our current journey through time is one way. We can't go back. I can't go back to yesterday or the day before. Here, you would always be jumping ahead years, but you could never come back because you would always, your complexity level would always only be less complex for those continuing years, because when you pop down here, you're going to suddenly get the new chemtrail mix, you're going to be breathing that and get all of those chemicals and stuff. Instantly your complexity levels are going to jump up and you couldn't come back. There's also other kind of things. If you shot down here in 2020, maybe you landed in Wuhan, maybe you got the critter, right? And then if you come back, again, the paradox, if you were able to travel back, what does the pulse do? Does it bring that critter back with you? And if so, that would mean that it would be introduced in 1985, and all of a sudden time would get all kind of wonky. So, so they don't think about a lot of this stuff in the movies. So in that sense, complexity itself, just that mere complexity chain of the pulse recreating us, and even if you don't buy the pulse aspect of it, the complexity does exist. That we do have new chemicals in our body now, whether you think of them in an atomistic level or an etheric level through the pulse. There is that complexity of material in us now that didn't exist 5 years ago or didn't exist in our youth. And we could go back to those times, presuming we could overcome the energetic barrier, but then we would have to deal with the fact that we would be spewing out viri, bacteria, and all of this kind of stuff that didn't exist then, and that would be just because we were there breathing and, eating and so on, right, interacting. And so would it be like the Spanish conquistadors coming on over into the New World and just simply spewing out tuberculosis and spewing out all these other diseases and wiping out nearly 60 million North and maybe as many as 200 million South Americans, Native Americans, just because of disease? That's to be presumed. That would be presumed, that we would cause those kind of effects if we had time travel, unless the pulse somehow, cleansed us and maintained the pristine amount of complexity in each and every one of the eras. But then we still have the issue of the complexity of the individual, even if it recreated you without your diseases and without your heavy metal exposure and all of that kind of stuff in a past or a future environment, we still have the complexity level of the pollution of the mind. And the recreation of that complexity of the mind in the pollution of the social order if you should go back or come back to your existing point. So I think we live in an eternity. I think that it's very complex and there's all kinds of woo there, but I do not think that time travel is a possibility for so many different reasons. Among them, obviously, this complexity thing I'm discussing, but also the issue of the energy. We can get into that in just a quick second here. Okay, so the complexity level in hopping through time is there for the pulse and for the rest of the materium to recreate you with that complexity in the appropriate milieu that you find yourself hopping around in. And so, basically you're putting the universe to a shitload of work trying to keep your body in existence in the appropriate phase wherever you're at. Now also, Tesla would agree with me that time travel is not feasible. Now Tesla understood everything, and he said frequently he dropped these little hints about, if you only understood 3, 6, and 9, or if you only understood the nature of frequency, you would grasp reality. And that's quite true, okay? The reason that this is because all of reality is based on this particular frequency that we go through with this pulse that we cannot perceive. And it'll always be faster, that pulse will always be faster than we can ever augment our senses to actually look at, because otherwise then we could get into sync with the pulse. Now that's what, okay, so the pulse theory brings up two things that are instantly really cool. And that is that the spark of life idea, okay? A couple of them, I mean not just two, but dozens of them, okay? So it's the spark of life idea. Here is, this is our representation of the pulse. These little gaps in there are the void. And we will label that, specifically with V's later on, but because it's a void, it's a thing actually, in the sense that it's an absence of the pulse. Okay, so we're dealing with a frequency here. The frequency of, how do I want to do this? Hang on a second. Okay, so our consciousness exists continuously because we exist from over each and every one of these gaps. And so our consciousness is a spark of life that continues in spite of the fact that universe and the materium is destroyed. So in the time I'm talking to you, a bazillion, gazillion, however, who knows what, doesn't matter, it's a number, a giant digit of destructions have occurred. I have ceased to exist in that bazillion, gazillion times. And so with you. And it's all everywhere at the same time. That's what's called the ever-present now. This right here is the ever-present now. That's the EPN. We like acronyms and shit, so we're going to call it the EPN. That's when the pulse exists. We exist continuously, all right? Our consciousness exists continuously. But there's some things that you must understand from that. Yes, we are therefore eternal. Our consciousness exists outside of, this is proof that our consciousness exists outside of the space-time continuum, because we actually bridge that continuum as it is recreated each and every one of these times. This is also clear proof that you cannot change consciousness, because consciousness must be necessarily inviolate in order to be able to jump the gap and not be recreated in some new fashion. We know that this is the case because every morning when we wake up, with every breath, with every eye blink, every beat of our heart, we always feel the same as we did the minute before, the second before, the year before, the years before, the decades before. This is what accounts for old people saying, you know, on their deathbed, but I only feel 18. You know, why am I dying, right? I only feel 18. And it's because you feel the same all throughout your life. Through your consciousness is continuously the same all throughout your life. This is necessary in the structure of the materium. This is a requirement that we bridge this gap with our consciousness. This also means that the pulse is recreating and finding us and recreating us in the materium here by finding our particular frequency, our particular life spark, okay? So it's like our MAC address on our computer. You know, it's unique. And so I don't get recreated the next pulse thinking I'm somebody else. I don't get recreated feeling I'm somebody else. And so we are unique, and we are unique within the ever-present now, the collection of them that form what we call time and what we call eternity. And we are unique and continuous. So our uniqueness continues from each and every iteration, that we have that same element, that same feeling, right? And we maintain that feeling as we go forward. Our body changes, but there's always that part of our consciousness that feels the same, that says, I am me. Never mind who you were, what's your name when your body doesn't exist, okay? Or what your name was to your consciousness before you were born here, such that you are in this body and can say to yourself, I feel I am me. But we won't go into that at the moment. Okay, so this is part of the complexity of universe, that each and every one of these ever-present now pulses that recreates all of universe and then adds some to it as the necessary component for us to all move the next one. So each and every time I'm moving my hand, universe has to come along and shift stuff every time it makes that next iteration. So here I am with my hand at this point, here I am with my hand at that point, and here I am with my hand at that point. You just got the finger. So, you know, that's the way it works, is that I couldn't move if we didn't have these gaps. Universe has to recreate us in these gaps. And from this is the vast amount of all of energy, okay? And it's also, we're all adding to this level of complexity. Okay, So when we get recreated, all right, so there are layers to universe that we do not perceive. I'm not going to go much longer. There's these layers that universe that has that we do not visually see, that we're not aware of. We know that there's things like X-rays and, you know, ultraviolet and all these different kinds of things that we can't see normally with our eyes, but we know they exist because we have devices that can see them for us. And someday maybe we'll be able to have devices that will be able to see those parts of ourselves that we can't see. So for instance, we can't see inside ourselves, but you can if you do particular kinds of meditative techniques within the void, such that when you come out, you actually see yourself being recreated. You can actually, theoretically, if you advance to that level, you can watch in that flash of recreation each, 22 trillion times a second, you can watch your body be recreated and see things within your body. It strikes me as a shitload of work, and I've never tried to get there, right? But anyway, so we have things happen to us. And I just wanted to bring along this level of the complexity. So if this is us here, and we're in our little bubble being recreated, and new stuff happens to us, oddly, so to speak. New information is put on our X, on our I, on me, in the voids. So just like when I go to sleep at night, my body can repair because I'm not off doing stuff, right? Like when I'm awake. It can't repair itself when I'm off doing stuff, demanding energy, moving, making these videos, making tea and walking on the beach, all this kind of shit. It can only do it when I'm laying down asleep. And so universe, in a sense, in the pulse, uses the void to add new information to your sum total that's going along in each and every one of these things. And that void is necessary and is used that way. And so what actually happens here is that, so in the voids, is when the next set of the program that's going to occur to us at a karmic level is set into motion. This was examined and discussed by this really interesting religion called Jain, or Jainism. There was a Germanic Jain fellow. I don't know if he's a priest or not, but he went into this karmic stuff really seriously. I don't think he's alive, and it was his entire life's work, and he kept refining and refining and refining, and wrote the most elegant book in German, the most condensed, concise book on karma that I'd ever run across, detailing the karmans, the various different types of them, and so on. Anyway, so we're going to discuss karma and in a sort of a shamanic pulse level, and then that'll be it. I'll go off and do work. I got to clean up after bears. So it's my karma to go clean up after that damn bear, because I'm obviously attracting him somehow, and he's rooting through all of my garbage. I was hoping there's nothing there for him. He'd rooted through it the day before and strewed it all over the yard, and I had to go and pick it all up yesterday. I should have thought to put out all these old computer books, and maybe he would have shredded them for me. But in any event, so here we are, and this is our X, and in this particular void here, you're going to get a smack in the nose, all right? And so that smack in the nose is not going to happen until you get down to that void, however many voids that is, right? It'll happen the next time your body is incarnated right here. You're going to get a smack in the nose. You probably deserve it. But you're going to have an injury. You're going to have a wonkiness on your nose as a result of that smack in the nose. In order for that to occur, universe actually has to do things to create that whole series. It has to recreate you with the fist almost to hit your nose. It has to recreate you just as the fist is hitting the nose. It has to recreate it as the nose is being smushed out. It has to recreate it with the pain going in and all of that. It doesn't, and we think of it as happening really instantly, but for universe, it has to do this trillions of times. Trillions upon trillions of times. Just to get you that bloody nose that is your karmic due at that particular recreation, right? And so if you were able to see it, you would be able to see your bulgy, future-oriented energy bodies out here as they poke their way out into the future, and they would be all the way out to here, representationally close, and that bloody nose act right there let's get it as red, that bloody nose act right there would be already appearing in the shadow shells that are going to solidify into the complexity that will be the bloody nose when you arrive there. And so you will actually have in your energetic shells hints of that bloody nose as you're recreated through all of these shells until you get to that point and you actually achieve that karmic bloody nose that was the result of the action that you took back here when you kicked that guy in the nuts. So you probably deserved it, right? And so this is how complexity is managed and smushed together in the simulation that we call reality, that really is a simulation but has nothing to do with computers, is not run by anybody, but has a mechanistic functioning in this way that we can understand and use. Now, we can understand and use this kind of mechanistic functioning. It derives from the ether understanding. The ether understanding is limited. We know that that is the case because there was no real work into the ether since the Michelson-Morley fake news experiment in I want to say 78, but around there, 1878 to 1888, something in there, right? Michelson-Morley did this experiment that proved the ether didn't exist, but it was designed to prove the ether didn't exist and to support the whole takeover of the agenda. It was a bogus thing. And we've not worked on all of this since then, as collectively as humans. So we haven't had the advances in the mathematics and so on that will allow us to have a language that will explain this stuff at a better level than I am able to do so for the academics who want to get into the minutia of all of this, right? And we have to acknowledge that Boscovich lived in a world in which there was no calculus. There was algebraic functioning, but you look and you notice that although it is true that the ether is best described in a geometric fashion, but his references to algebraic thinking are limited. So he was limited by the expression that was available to him at his time. We should be able to do so much better as soon as we get our thinking right and drop a lot of this quantum mechanics and the whole relativity business. I mean, I just shake my head in disbelief that's even gotten this far. In any event, though, so this is basically you accumulate karma over time, as the Jain would have it, as karmans, individual karmans. The word karma is plural, and so you have collectively you have karmans that jump all over you, and that they stick to you, and you have to deal with them as you go forward in time because they are the things that are causing the expressions the universe wants you to have in order for you to deal with your karma, the collective load you're carrying. And there are ways to deal with this, obviously, because it's been sliced and diced. We understand some of these aspects of it. The ever-present now and our progress through it from point to collect our bloody nose is the intense subject and scrutiny of a great deal of thinking, most of it in Sanskrit that's never been translated. A lot of that may come from civilizations that are pre-Ice Age, pre-last Ice Age. And we don't know what humans thought about things at that level because we've never translated a lot of this stuff from Sanskrit, which we must acknowledge is even then, as voluminous as it is, a remnant of what existed before. I think that was it. I have to start consulting and keeping other... Okay. Okay, so let's really quickly discuss the ether here, all right? And the idea of field. I don't have anything here. I was going to bring out like a scarf or something and shred it for you. But let's do this conceptually. If I were to take this hat here, which is a woven hat, I could find one end of the yarn that was used to create it, and then I could unravel the hat. I could unknit the hat, just as if okay, so I've got a little string here. I pull on the string, and eventually, like in a cartoon, the whole arm of the sweatshirt starts unraveling, and I'm left with a big pile of fiber, right? And it's all thread. Now, here's the thing. In that situation, I could take it all the way down and do the last little thing, and boink, I don't have a sweatshirt anymore. I've totally got a giant pile of disassociated thread. So where did the sweatshirt go? It's still here. Every single fiber of it, every single part of its mass is still here. But the sweatshirt is no longer there. Sweatshirt does not exist. And I'm incapable at that stage of putting it back together. I couldn't recreate it if I tried, even though I have exactly 100% of it right here in front of me. And this is all of our reality, okay? Basically, all of our reality at all levels is a sweatshirt or a hat. It only exists as the weave of the individual stuff, as the pattern that was used to weave that together. So if you undo the pattern of it, you don't have the thing itself. You have the constituent part of it, the fiber of it all, but you don't have the thing itself. And frequently, if you undo the pattern of it, you can't put it back together. So, you know, I've never seen anybody that can undissect a frog, right? That sort of thing. And so all of life is nothing but patterns created. That's what we are here when we jump from iteration to iteration to iteration in these trillions of pulses that are happening continuously as complexity is growing that way and forward into the future, never back, never back, never back. We never go back. We're nothing but complex patterns ourselves, right? Our consciousness is complex patterns. It must be inviolate. So when people say they're altering their consciousness, changing their consciousness, raising their consciousness, I say bullshit. I say hooey, because your consciousness must be the same in order for the pulse to recreate you as you go along. Otherwise, it would jump a gap and recreate you as Aunt Mabel, you know, or Uncle Shaniqua. You know, you never can tell, right? So there must be some level of consistency, and the only consistency through universe is consciousness. Go ask a rock. Okay, because a rock is conscious in its own way of its task of sitting there as a rock, but that's it. All right, that's all it knows is I'm a rock. It doesn't even know it just rock, rock, rock. And so, but its consciousness exists at that level, and universe recreates it, off it goes, because that's like the IP address for computers and stuff. So our consciousness, our frequency, are our unique signatures within this ever-present now being continually recreated into the future constantly, all right? Okay, so I can, and this is all of this here is an aspect of the little bloop theory if you really get down into it, all right? If you really start considering this, and I've been considering this for 50 years maybe, I don't know, I'm 67. Yes, I've been considering this since I was about 16. So 50 years, right? And I've thought about a lot of these different parameters and gone down some of these little different avenues on it. Now, this can explain all of the physical realities that we see before us. We don't have to invoke quantum mechanics. This can explain action at a distance, all different kinds of things, right? Because basically this explains, this whole understanding is part and parcel of the fact that all of universe, all of the materium is glued together by magnetism. And so in the recreation of all of this, we're all magnetically recreated each and every time, and all of our particles stick to each other and don't want to stick to any other particle because of the frequency of our particular magnetism, which is determined right at recreation, all right? So anyway, one last item here just to kind of freak everybody out, and that is I know why the Tic-Tac UFOs and so forth travel at rates and speed with no inertia. And it's real simple if you think about it, right? They're traveling in the void and simply being recreated in the next pulse. And this is the same way that magnetism exists, because magnetism is a dynamic thing. It continuously is pulling and exerting. It's not a static thing at all. It's not static like, you know, gravity could actively do something to it, right? It's the bottom magnet here is being held on dynamically by the magnetism that's attaching it to the other two. And so it's continually pulling. The the woo ships, as I call them, those ships that use the mag drive, are flying or moving in here. They're moving in the gap or gaps in between the recreation. And this has to do, if you read your Boscovich, go read the Theoria Naturalis Philosophy by Boscovich, you'll see that there are limit points of cohesion and limit points of repulsion. It is the limit points of cohesion that he refers to that are exhibited as the pulse is recreating, and just as it's going into the void, that's when the repulsion, the stronger force, actually comes into existence. And so when the guy on the, I think it was the Nimitz, the USS Nimitz, the radar tech said, well, it was here and now I see it over there, it's because he was recreated in one of these gaps, and as he was being recreated here to look at his screen again, which is happening in that span right there, it had already used that same gap to recreate itself physically way the hell up here. And because it does not have the need as a woo ship, as a magnetic drive, to be physically occupied, jump, 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 jump all the way through. It could, but it doesn't have to. It's a different concept, right? You don't fly faster than light, but effectively you fly fundamentally faster than time, within time itself. And this does not violate time travel in any way, shape, or form, because you're always moving with the flow, with the pulse. You're pulse surfing, so to speak, at that level. Anyway, so got to remember that complexity increases over time. You can't go back. You can never go home again. That's what all of those books and shit they were trying to shove down you in the 3rd and 4th grade, all the way up through this age 16 or 17. That's the whole point of them. You never go home again, right? That old house isn't the same, this kind of shit. And then the pattern of the weave determines the existence of the cloth. You take away the pattern, all you got is a big pile of threads. And the pulse of the woo is continuous and is the energy for everything within universe. And it's just a matter of learning to harmonize with it, and you get a whole lot better ride. You can surf a lot better if you surf with the flow. Mahalo.